came under the students, but they just people in the
What? Yeah. Are you serious?
I didn't think that was legal.
I don't think that was
we
either.
don't have any more classes since you qualified to teach.
So that's Georgia.
So Christian college.
Which one? Are you serious? It's crazy.
I said,
Testing.
can you hand me this? What is that?
Formal statements from eliminating petition.
How are you today?
Oh, I'm all right.
Are you feeling
better?
No,
No.
Worse?
it's just all this junk in my chest. Tried to do a workout yesterday and quit halfway through because I just couldn't stop coughing. Every time I kicked up to do handstand push-ups, like it would just start.
I ain't in that house.
Question for you. Why is the book of Ezekiel considered like the second part of the book in the Bible to understand? Revelations being first and then Ezekiel being second.
It's probably just once again because of the apocalyptic nature.
So then I think that should be the next thing you teach when you go back to the Bible.
I'm preaching on Ezekiel. Preaching on Ezekiel Sunday.
Are you?
Oh, me?
Valley of the Dry Bones.
No, that's right.
I can do Ezekiel after our theodicy section. I actually don't. I mean, I don't think it's that hard.
I just wondered if I was Googling last night. Gary goes, well, I said, you know, I'm working on it. Automatically locks up AI. So your Google, that's the first thing you get before you get everything else. He goes, no, it doesn't. I said, we're setting up bonefish on a dinner. We're celebrating our birthdays. And so anyway, like then, what is the hardest Bible in the book? And what is the hardest book in the Bible to understand?
I'm sure you are.
Dude, I
guarantee you.
The second part is talent. AI is the thing you get.
I know.
I said, my kids don't even have to do AI because Google just automatically does it. Wait, he goes, what did you use, Gemini? I said, no, I said, I just use regular Google. I didn't do Gemini or anything. And he goes, oh, so that's hey, the phones are speaking out. You know, that's the first thing they do. Yeah, I mean, answer all the book that you read.
No, I already buy approved.
English teachers
You
so
can
bad.
get English coffee. Yeah, already. So I just pay attention.
No.
Instead of under. Yeah. Cleaver. I just buy a package.
Is Alan coming?
It's easier.
This is where I would be if I was in more. What's your Irish music?
Gary says to me all the time.
Absolutely. You talk to your kids.
And I would have to be talking to you.
And he said, well, and I, because it's like something like really reaching.
I already told you this. No, you didn't.
This is awesome.
So stop it. I don't have to talk to you this way.
Okay. When he was in. I was like, damn, I didn't think you, I had written something. Yeah. If you read that post, it just one scrub.
It's sort of a lot.
That's why I went to yeah, and they also, in my time, the hospital.
Oh, yeah, we just, we regular clothes, we didn't change.
Yeah. It was a beautiful thing.
It's beautiful.
I love successes.
It was beautiful.
When you're on the board and filming, it's like this.
It's that and experiment of the Rotary Club.
1 year.
She's doing it. She did six. What was
I
it?
do call it for the road.
16
Oh, I haven't
more.
even-
Yeah.
Really, the Rotary.
That's where I met Louis.
That's
The
where-
white dress, nursing dress.
You were in a white dress?
I was in a white dress.
That white dress. Oh my God. I said you were in scrubs.
Not by then, I'm not
Satellite.
Yeah.
But you never tell him to keep reaching back.
Because I know, I was like a lot.
But we were. Oh, yeah.
Go ahead. So they're actually, it'll be here like, yeah.
I thought it was finished. She's going to see if there's anybody trying to work. Because they can't get in. The doorman.
No, the door was open.
Was the door open?
The door was open.
I guess y'all.
Jenny was there.
You got a lot of clinics.
Just like this, you can
I
walk in there.
would just, I run around the windows. Sure.
And now sure enough,
Yeah,
yeah.
once I get.
Yes.
And
She's
then I
gonna lock you
and then I
back at
started-
1:30 because she's leaving.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So you go out, I'll
That
go
was
back.
good.
Yeah.
I would have, I had thought of it.
Yeah, well, they were comfortable, but they're.
Not taking my
they look
luck.
good.
So it's Nancy.
Yes, yes.
She's not here.
Which actually were not
I can take her to kids.
Coming in to take care of.
It's very pure.
It is very pure.
Oh my God,
It's
that's
just
good.
Yeah, the trip on my mom got was canceled.
Here. He said there was a problem. He didn't tell me.
Because I do know. They made you come home, but he didn't tell you. That's coming up,
It's the
right?
one that's over there.
Is it not coming up like in a week or so?
No, I think it's like very strong.
I think it's interesting. It shows so many things. You don't even realize it's.
All the authors that have
Oh,
tried to
okay.
emulate and create somewhere successful.
Alrighty,
First.
we're gonna go ahead and get started. I don't know if Jan's coming today and Alan's sitting in the car. So,
Trying to put it. I know he is.
so I was trying to outline the next 2 or 3 classes. So some of the things that we're going to talk about, which had originally been meant for this class, were the appeal of evil to our virtues, the lure of a long life, and judgment and mercy. But as I was doing my research today, or not today, leading up for today, it just so happened to be doing it while the news was on. Of course, what they were talking about is the war in Iran. And as that was on in the background, all of a sudden I started reading Tolkien's depiction of war. So I thought, I'm going to go down this rabbit hole. And I did. As someone who majored in political science, minored in history, considering when I went to college, 2005 to 2009, Middle East politics, war against terrorism, all that stuff was kind of at the forefront of my education in college. So I've always been a little bit interested, fascinated with the Middle East and its relationship with the West. But I think in order to understand Tolkien and the myths he created and the stories he wrote, you have to understand some of those truly formative experiences that he had. And chief among those is the time he spent as a British soldier in World War I. So in 1914, England declared war on Germany. Tolkien, being a brilliant scholar that he was, applied for a program that allowed young men to finish their college education while they were in officer training. So Tolkien applied for this so that he could finish his bachelor's degree. And while he was doing that, he was being trained as an officer. So in June of 1916, he was eventually sent to France. For those of you who don't know, I'm not going to go into a huge historical explanation or even a small one, but he was present at the Battle of the Somme, which was one of the bloodiest conflicts of World War I. And he admitted to his son in 1944 that he was not a particularly good military officer. But he had been at the Battle of the Somme for about 2 weeks before he got trench sickness, trench disease, trench sickness, trench foot. And he was eventually sent back to England. But one of the things he wrote was about the animal horrors of his experience in the trench. So how we're going to start this class is I just have a few observations, quotes from people who fought in the Battle of the Somme, and then some more modern takes from a book by Tim O'Brien called The Things They Carried, which if you ever want to read a book about the Vietnam War, I highly suggest that. It is an excellent, excellent read. But here are some thoughts, some experiences of those English soldiers who fought at the Battle of the Somme. I'm back again from hell, young faces bleared with blood and sucked down into the mud. Flesh like moldering fish gleamed greenishly through splits in shredded uniforms. The stench of dead bodies seeped into my skin. The sound of explosions rattled my brain. This is not a war. Rather, it is an exploration of how far men can be degraded. And then some quotes from Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. A true war story is never moral. It does not instruct, nor encourage virtue, nor suggest models of proper human behavior, nor restrain men from doing the things men have always done. If a story seems moral, do not believe it. If at the end of a war story you feel uplifted, or if you feel that some small bit of rectitude has been salvaged from the larger waste, then you have been made the victim of a very old and terrible lie. There is no rectitude whatsoever. There is no virtue. As a first rule of thumb, therefore, you can tell a true war story by its absolute and uncompromising allegiance to obscenity and evil. They carried all they could bear, and then some, including a silent awe for the terrible power of the things they carried. War is hell, but that's not the half of it, because war is also mystery and terror and adventure and courage and discovery and holiness and pity and despair and longing and love. War is nasty, war is fun, war is thrilling, war is drudgery, war makes you a man, and war makes you dead. And then finally, you're never more alive than when you're almost dead. Now, I wanted to start those off because I think Tolkien is very honest about the brutality of what war is. And we're going to talk a bit about kind of his inspirations besides just his experiences in World War I. But one of the clearest connections, and I would say if there was anything he took away from World War I that made itself into Lord of the Rings, was the dead marshes. Does anybody remember that from the movies or reading? What's the kind of general vibe or feeling when it comes to the dead marshes?
You're not supposed to look at the faces because they'll suck you down.
Yeah.
And because there's lost, their souls or ghosts or whatever you want to call them, like the barrows too.
Yeah.
Yeah, nasty, stinky, smelly, oily, just nasty swamp.
What do you think that evokes? What kind of connection with World War One could maybe be taken from that?
No man's land.
No man's land. In the Lord of the Rings, in his description of the dead marshes, for a while they stood there like men on the edge of sleep where nightmares lurk, holding it off, though they know that they can only come to morning through the shadows. And he goes on, even to mere dead faces, some haggard phantom of green spring would come. But here neither spring nor summer would ever come again. Here nothing lived, not even the leprous growths that feed on rottenness. The gasping pools were choked with ash and crawling muds, sickly white and gray, as if the mountains had vomited their filth of their entrails upon the lands. High mounds of crushed and powdered rock, great cones of fire and poison stain, stood like an obscene graveyard in endless rows, slowly revealed in the reluctant light. This is what he is writing his experience in the trenches. The shell shocks, the poisonous gases, the smell of rotting corpses. For those of you who don't really know much about history and the history of war, one could say that the first mechanized industrial war was actually the American Civil War. But World War I is when what was learned in the American Civil War becomes the practice of all. There are stories about the French still imagining they're fighting the Prussians and making these gallant charges on horsebacks and with their rifles. And one man in a gun turret with an automatic machine gun mows down hundreds. The sacrifice, the wanton violence, is almost as if they didn't quite know what to do with themselves. So the dead that are collected here on the battlefield.
Tens of millions of horses killed.
Yeah.
Numbers like that. It's crazy.
But this is a place deeply rooted in what he witnessed on the Western Front. The idea of dead faces peering up with lidless eyes from pools of stagnant water, the entire earth shaking. It's not just a battlefield to Tolkien in real life or in Lord of the Rings. It is a world that has been severely marred. That's the word we're going to like to use in this class. The world has been marred and disfigured. The natural order in some ways has decayed and collapsed. And you'll notice kind of this in his description of the dead marshes, it's almost as if there is no hope that this could ever be salvaged, that the destruction wrought in these places is a permanent scar. And that's one of the big motifs that we can take away from Tolkien's idea of war. War leaves scars, even on those who are victorious, even on the land, even on creation. War leaves scars. And one of the interesting things I would say about Tolkien is how much he is influenced by kind of those medieval heroic adventures. So he translated Beowulf into English, and he was very obsessed with these Nordic Scandinavian tales of heroes going out to slay dragons and beasts, and men who were kind of lauded for the strength of their arms in battle and the deeds that they had done. But instead of mimicking that and just making war and violence and battle be this pathway towards glory and fame, He wants to show that it has cost and that has a price. And I think he wanted to be a little bit more grounded in the reality that he was trying to depict. So the Dead Marshes are kind of, I would say, him ultimately sharing that one experience he really had in battle that kind of forever changed him and influenced what evil looked like and the results of that evil.
If I remember correctly, the Dead Marshes are the result of a battle 3,000 years before.
Yeah.
It's still that way after 3,000 years.
Yeah. It's a evil is permanently wrought or marred, scarred into the land in which that battle happened. I would say the second piece of The Lord of the Rings that was greatly influenced by his experience and the experience of those who he knew in World War I was the trauma that Frodo had when he came back. For those of you who watched the movies and read the books, they have victory. The ring is tossed into Mount Doom, evil, Sauron destroyed, the great enemies vanquished. But how does Frodo feel? Hollow. There's no sense of this great joy or this monumental victory, and he is now unburdened from that which he has seen, from what he has had to do, and from what he has had to endure. There is this kind of, he's no longer the person he was when he left the Shire. And I think the grim reality is that he begins to know and to learn, I don't get to go back to that. My experiences carrying this ring have forever changed me. And it's kind of in this place that we realize he is forever going to carry this misery along with him. And that's kind of set to juxtaposition to all the other.
Well, Samwise, he comes back, gets
Yeah.
married, has kids.
Samwise comes back, married, has kids. Aragorn is made the king. There's celebrations in Gondor and throughout the realms of men. Everybody's happy to have rid themselves of the evil that was Sauron and Mordor and the orcs and the Uruk-hai. But Frodo can't feel that joy, that relief, that excitement, and that joy. And what are we to make of this idea?
PTSD.
PTSD.
Well, he was a ring bearer, so now he carries the weight of everything that's come following that, kind of like you mentioned PTSD or the sorrow or the sadness.
Yeah,
As a matter of fact, his perception of his area he lived in, the Glen, I think, has changed.
Yeah.
We perceive it.
Very good. I think that idea of him still being burdened by what was cast away it's a good observation.
Didn't he call it my precious at the end?
Yeah.
Take a piece of her.
Yeah. A piece of him in some ways was thrown into the fires of Mount Doom. What else?
I think everybody, men or women that go to war, some can come home and like Sam and just go on, they put it on the shelf and go on and it doesn't come back and bite them. But there are others that it does, and I think it just speaks to the differences of people's resiliency or whatever.
I think it's also what they experience in the war.
Yes and no. I mean, I don't disagree with you with that. I had one of my uncles, he was captured in World War II in Italy and had to march by foot to Germany and was at Starlight 13. And he did survive. And he put it on a shelf. He came home, went to medical school and was a family doctor for a small town in Tennessee. You know, we never knew his story until the end of his life. And I spent every summer in his home. You know, but then there are others that really come home and have significant PTSD. And just.
It's your ability to compartmentalize.
Yes,
A lot of
yes.
the stuff.
Yes, definitely. My husband, who has been to war several times, his famous saying is, the man who wants to go to war is the man who has not been to war. If you go to war, you're gonna think real hard about that. My nephew is a major in the Army, and when he was making that decision, he wanted to speak with my husband, and Bill would not do it. He could not have any responsibility in his choice. So he said, you gotta make that on your own.
Yeah, I had 2 examples. So my church administrator at my first church, Karen, ended up being like, we called her Will's golden grandma, because she was essentially like a living grandmother, because we were far from family. And her husband, Jerry, loved Will, even though he hated, I shouldn't say hated, even though he did not like kids very much. But I still remember, I always came into the church from a side door that went down into the basement through the kitchen to my office. And I opened the door one day and Jerry was in there cleaning something. He was very OCD about things being clean. And when the door closed, he turned around, you know, look of pure terror on his face. And Karen told me, you know, he doesn't do well being startled. After he got back from Vietnam, he had PTSD. He was always, you know, always had to kind of announce myself. If I knew Jerry was there, I never wanted him to be surprised by door shutting or any loud noises. Another experience, one of my friends in college, probably the most carefree person I've ever known, funny, you know, he's kind of that charismatic person you just like to be around, like to follow around, makes everybody laugh. He's a West Point grad, was a U.S. Army Ranger, and while they were in Afghanistan, their Humvee column got hit by an IED, which killed 2 of the members of his unit. He himself was shot twice. And I remember it's probably 18 months after it happened that I saw him again for the first time. And he wasn't the same person anymore. He was scarred, and not just from the gunshot wounds, but mentally scarred. And he was no longer the same person that he was before. And I think this is true even outside of war. Trauma can leave these impacts on the psyche, on the heart, on the soul, that one can never really rid themselves of. I say the person I was before Will had cancer is not the person I am today. I used to be a happier person. I used to find more joy in things, used to laugh more. And ever since then, I just haven't been the same person that I was before. But I think it's important that we view and understand what it is that's happened to Frodo and the price one has to pay in witnessing and confronting true evil. And I think it's well thought out and well understood that Tolkien would make this point about Frodo, that he doesn't get to share in the joy of victory, that he kind of carries that confrontation with evil even after the victory is won. Frodo ends up going to the Grey Lands,
The Grey Havens.
the Grey Havens, as kind of solace, for a peace that he could not find, anywhere else but there.
Bilbo too.
Bilbo went with him too. Both of them carried the ring, and I think were greatly affected by it. Frodo in the book says, "I'm wounded and it will never heal."
They use that piece of the
Morgul blade.
yeah, it's always be there.
And I think for somebody who has who's been influenced by, the great heroes of myth and lore from the North, from Germania, from the Celts, from Scandinavia, that you would think there would be this revel in battle and this great feasting and joy and victory. But Tolkien was someone who knew real war and the scars it left. And I've always appreciated stories, as someone who reads a lot, that never give neat resolutions, because neat resolutions don't feel real. There's price to pay for victory. It's never that simple or never that easy. And I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind, that I don't ever think the Bible speaks to that idea of a just neat resolution. I think scripture is very rooted in the idea of pain, of suffering, of there not always being the right decision or the easy decision. And sometimes the prices we have to pay aren't fair. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about modern warfare here in a minute. But I think, our nation's, as much as we like to say we support the military and all that, we don't. We don't take care of veterans the way we should. The suicide rate of veterans is astronomically high, and something, all we do is cut back VA hospitals and mental health work for those who have engaged in combat like that. And I think what we do is we try and hide the scars of war. We tried to hide the cost, because at the beginning it only feels monetary. But in the end, when the soldiers return, when the dead are brought back, it's kind of a real deeper cost that we prefer not to see, and not to have to think about.
I think Vietnam was the first war that was kind of played on TV.
Yeah.
They got to see in more real time what was going on. My brother did 2 tours. He got 4 Purple Hearts. He was never better. You remember all those postal shootings? My brother, when he got out of the army, you could go into the post office and keep your service. They were retired at 55. All those postal shootings were mostly Vietnam vets, losing it for the reason. And I would go to some functions with him with the post office. They started drinking. They were a scary bunch.
Yeah.
They had a lot of pent up anger even decades later.
I worked with over 100 of veterans, mostly from Vietnam, some from the Gulf Wars, as well as military women who had been sexually assaulted. And the enormity of their pain and what, especially the Vietnam guys, what they did, and what was done to them and what they witnessed is, I can't even mention it out loud.
I mean,
It
I'm
was
11 years younger than my brother, and he had hand-to-hand with people that were my size.
Yeah.
He remembers fighting, they were adults, but they were only the same size.
This was beyond
Yeah.
fighting
Yeah,
kind of stuff. And it literally, what we know about it, it literally changes your brain. It's called the amygdala hijack. Hence the hitting the floor if you drop a cafeteria tray. Don't go under the table or something, because your brain cannot process adequately or put words to what you're experiencing, and it's all in rapid motion. And so it bypasses, your cortex, part of your brain. And so you respond as if it's immediate danger to a lot of those things, and hence that response. I also observed that a lot of these folks went ahead and had successful careers and so on. And then when they stopped working, it was like hitting a brake on a car. All that garbage came slamming them. And, they look fine until then, but we don't treat our vets well enough, what they need.
My uncle came up behind my brother when he just got back from Vietnam and sat him on the back. Said, "Welcome back." My brother picked him up and threw him across the room. One big motion. Don't sneak up on me like that.
And I think one of the things we can't help to ignore, I don't think something that was lost on Tolkien, even Christ bears the scars of what he endured. You remember the disciples, they wanted proof that Jesus was who he says he was, and they asked what?
Show me the hand. Show me the hands.
Show me the scars. Show me the scars. And I think some of the grace, and I think maybe one of the things we can take away from Lord of the Rings, that Frodo was never left to kind of carry this alone. He never carried the ring, even though he carried the ring himself. He had Sam with him to help him. And he never would have made it without Sam. And even after he's done, he still has people like Gandalf caring for him and helping him kind of move into that next realm and into that next world. And I think our calling as church, our calling as Christians should be one oriented to not letting those who bear these wounds carry them alone. I think in some ways that's what grace is. And Frodo had that grace around him, which, as I said, not everyone does. Another feature of war, it's going to kind of lead me into our modern wars, is how mechanized things became, and this idea that distance in some ways sanitizes war. People used to be able to look in the whites of the eyes of those they were fighting in hand-to-hand combat. And with the increased industrialization of war, you could be further and further away. And even though there is a distance between you and your enemy, or the person that's trying to kill you, or the person you're trying to kill, those realities of what war is still exist. So that poisoned land that he speaks about in the Dead Marshes is clearly reminiscent of the chlorine gas and the gases that were used in the war. The automatic weapons, the choking fumes, the cratered earth, the artillery fire. They learned fairly early in World War I that the psychic warfare, the psychic trauma of shooting those guns all night was almost more effective than actually destroying targets or actually killing people, because it was just the constant psychological battery that you were putting your enemies under. And I think his description of Mordor, of what it is kind of the industrialization of a world taken to the max, to the extreme, which there is nothing green there. There's only fire and metal and stone and smoke. And we've talked about how he had this kind of preference for a life outside the city. the Shire is very much Tolkien's idea of the ideal world with green grass, with flowers, with a little village, a slow life. But I think one of the things with this mechanized warfare that this kind of connects with Christian understanding is that we are called in some ways to be stewards of the earth. You know, in some ways, this God creates Adam and then Eve as those who are supposed to tend and care for God's creation. So if we think of the Garden of Eden, it is made as this perfect creation, this perfect little world. And it's Adam and Eve's responsibility to tend for and to care for that good creation. But the more we advance, the more we know, the more we can develop and engineer and create. I think the more we believe in some ways we have dominion over, and we're not so much stewards as we are who just abuse and ravage and take. And this kind of calls into the idea, I think, once again, John 3, Jesus doesn't just come to save us, he comes for the world and for all of creation. And Paul writes in Romans 8, creation itself will be set free, implying it's not just us that are in bondage, it's creation itself that is in bondage. And I want us to think about here for a second, is creation itself in bondage because creation sins, or is it in bondage for a different reason?
Who said that it was in bondage?
Paul.
That was deep.
Creation is bondage because of what we do. We create bondage.
It's all of our action.
Yeah, so we are part of creation, but we're the ones that are destroying it.
We are the stewards, which means we have the
We have
power.
the power to control it or not.
And in our power and our brokenness, we bind everything under us in sin. And I think that's true of everything that has power. I mean, the way in which we teach and parent our children very much kind of binds them to a worldview, to an understanding, to a way of life that they don't really have any say or any power of. But as stewards of creation, we have in some ways bound creation to our brokenness. And I think that's something we see in an industrialized age. The amount of trees we cut down, the amount of pollution. I just read an article yesterday about the waste that these data centers being built for AI do to the environment, just to the local areas, and the energy that is being required to even run these things. Again, said 6 or 7 years, these data centers will be the equivalent of 40 Seattle, Washingtons being put onto the energy grid of the United States, which is almost an addition of 40 major US cities. It was almost remarkable. And the destruction that will kind of bring. But I think, Tolkien being in world, or also he's writing this during World War II. More than anything, there is one thing that begins to grow and develop fear and panic as it is revealed to the world. And that would be what?
But the Holocaust,
Well, I think the Holocaust is
that's leader.
Part of death and the cost of war.
Well, it's the bomb, it's the air bombing.
it's
Yeah,
the
'cause
bomb.
He's writing this as he's down in the tunnels.
It's the bombing's one, but I think the dawning of the nuclear age more than anything. Nuclear weapons are the pinnacle of industrialized destruction. Hiroshima and Nagasaki are the ultimate scars that humanity has made on the world, and everywhere else that we've tested our bombs. But it's this human ingenuity kind of untethered from any moral restraint.
The best example is if you take a look at our weapons, oh gosh, what was that one? They have the tomahawks, which are so, they're almost, it's almost a sterile feeling that you can launch these things off. We have no responsibility for it. It guides itself. It goes right where it wants to go.
Yeah, and that's something we're actually getting ready to talk about and say how Tolkien's fear and view of war and the industrialized age, which I think has given way to the digital age, how that's kind of made these things even more evil in some ways. But Tolkien's idea that these weapons are the work of Melkor's disciples, I think takes a chilling concreteness. I imagine the people who fought in World War I thought, I can't imagine it ever getting any worse than this. Only for the experiences of World War II that end with the total destruction.
The total war on everything.
And it's, could it get worse? The answer to that question is yes, it could absolutely always get worse.
I mean, a lot of people died in Hiroshima, not negating that, but the nightly bombings in Germany would kill similar numbers.
Yeah.
With the firestorm.
I mean, Germany had done a good job of trying to just level France and England, and they was returned to them tenfold. But it's this kind of, with our growing intelligence and capabilities and understandings of the way things work and how to build, it's kind of this stark reminder of what happens when power is pursued without any sense of humility or stewardship or respect or understanding for what it is that we do. I think one of the great faults of humanity is we'll build it and we'll figure it out after. We'll use it and we'll figure out what it can do after. And that's, I would absolutely say that's where we are with AI.
Yeah.
And I think taking that to today is even more of an extreme, because I think our modern way of war, especially what we're seeing unfold in Russia and Ukraine, and now in Iran, is this sanitization because of the distance. Tolkien's generation, mud and blood and terror. Now drone pilots sit thousands of miles away and steer and drive drones that drop bombs. And war is no longer always experienced as something lived in the body. It's almost mediated. Yeah, it's mediated through technology, reduced to data, videos and images. And one of the disturbing things that I think's existed since post 9/11 is the American fascination with things blowing up. You'll see, war today being shown to Americans. It's the digital feed of a bomb right before it makes contact with its target. Yeah. As they were taking out those Venezuelan boats or whatever, and just seeing a boat going through the ocean and then vaporized. These targeted attacks, which are just explosions, kind of distances and protects you from the actual experience of what it is that is happening, or kind of removed. We almost feel as if it's more civilized to engage in war in this way, to rain down death and destruction in some ways from the heavens.
Our costs are nothing, you know.
Yeah, art. I mean,
Just give us like a bunch. So,
and I think even more disturbing now is this increased use of AI, of artificial intelligence to target, to find the enemy. Humans having power over AI and then allowing AI to do this, once again, I think gives us some morality that we ourselves might be able to justify these things to ourselves, but in reality, I don't think God sees it the way that we often do.
It seems like war now, not only involving the armies, but it's involving more of the people that live there are the ones that are also experiencing the destruction. Where, during World War I, World War II, it's out on the battlefield, and the surrounding people may or may not have gotten caught up. Now it seems like, we're not fighting battlegrounds, we're fighting cities.
Urban war.
And urban war, and people with the guns.
Afghanistan,
Yeah.
9/11.
That it's now all these people, innocent people are getting caught up in the crosshairs more so of the war than so much.
I went through World War I, but World War II, civilians were killed by the tens of millions. I mean, the Germans decimated Russia, and England, what we did to Germany at the end.
Yeah.
60,000 at night was unusual.
Yeah.
So
Well,
civilians.
Yeah, it's just, so when they show it on TV, as you say, in the bombings of it, but where the bombings are located too, they just said this.
The Israeli
Yeah.
conflict is much more urban than anything I've ever seen.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if Iran is that, part of it is, but a lot of it's at the military, but because of where they embed themselves in their tunnels and all that, they just blew up Gaza, pretty much.
So this all kind of leads me to the last question of this section, which was, if war continues to evolve in this way, what is the trauma for the one waging it? I mean, we know the trauma of those who house is bombed and falls down on their loved ones and they're pulled from the rubble 2 days later or something like that. But what's the trauma, or what's the wound or the scar left on people doing it? And
it's interesting because I'll give you an example. My son was in Afghanistan in artillery, and he said the artillery, they went out in the field and shot for a week. The worst thing he remembers is when he wasn't in the field for a week, he was on guard duty. And these children would come up, teenagers, and would attack the base with rifles, and he had to put them in their sights, and he had to ask permission to Afghanistan if he was going to shoot or not. He said that was the worst part of the whole thing. It wasn't blowing people up, 5 miles away. It was this kid, this teenager who was macho, whatever. I don't know why they did this, but they would come and shoot at the base. And he'd have them right there in his sights, and he said, I see this little kid, and I could have blown him away. They never told him to pull the trigger. They went and took care of it. They said that's the part that's so wild. The fact that, he had looked him in, could see him, but when he blowing something up 5 miles away, it didn't have the same impact. Yeah.
I think it's interesting how we use our religion or our belief system to excuse this. Take a look at a certain sect of the Muslim population. And I mean, if you look at that revolution, they're going to fight to the death because this is what they believe in. We're seeing the same type of thing emerge in this country in terms of nationalism, in terms of, my country right or wrong, my country. And, I think that it's almost when you look at how does this really phase people, I think it's interesting. We've already preconditioned a whole bunch of folks not to even think about it, to tell them it's absolutely right.
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things about Christianity is that I'd say Christianity, I would say the three Abrahamic religions, I would say Islam, you can put into that group of Christianity and Judaism, is the idea that you have to justify violence. The Romans did not make justification for what it is they were doing. If you had the power to do something, you did it. The only thing they were working against was their laws. And that was pretty much to prevent anyone from securing too much authority and too much power. Same could be said of the Greeks. Same could be said for all nations throughout history until Christianity kind of becomes the world religion of the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire. And all of a sudden, a conscience, so to speak, is injected into empire. And because it's injected into the halls of power, all of a sudden, the greatest form of power that empire can wield, which is violence, state-sanctioned violence, all of a sudden, in some way, shape, or form, needs to be justified. So that's when we allow, and the people in power feel the need to contort faith and doctrine in a way that justifies and makes their actions,
like the Crusades.
yeah, it makes their actions righteous, or at least provides the justification to hide under. And that's one of the things we're getting ready to talk about, this idea of Tolkien's understanding of the necessity of war and how it should be limited or kept in check. But I would say, just going back to my question from before, what scar is left? And I would say it's the scar on the soul, whether people are aware of its existence or not. Not feeling the impact of what it is that you're doing, and you being so far away and not have to deal with the consequences of what it is that you have done, or that you've been ordered to do, or that you're giving orders to do. I would say kind of corrupts the soul in some ways. You don't feel the impact of what it is that you're doing in the world. And I would say that's not one felt as much, maybe in the person as much as it is in the culture, in the society, and in the future we're kind of handing off to our children and to our children's children, that this is okay. And the consequences aren't something you really have to look at. So it seems in some ways acceptable. Yeah, normalized.
It's like the video games. Call of Duty.
Yeah. My favorite part. So we're going to go into Tolkien's understanding of the necessity and the limits of war. My favorite part in all the movies is when the Rohirrim, the Battle of Pelennor Fields, come to the crest of the hill, and Theoden and the riders of Rohan look upon, all the enemies and kind of have this fatalistic, we're done. The free people of men are done. And then Theoden gives that speech, which I don't know who that actor is, but still gives me goosebumps. I've seen that movie 1,000 times, and every time I hear it, it still gives me goosebumps. Arise now, arise, riders of Theoden, dire deeds awake, dark is it eastward, let horses be bridled, horn be sounded. Arise, arise, riders of Theoden, fell deeds awake, fire and slaughter, spears shall be shaken, shields be splintered, a sword day, a red day, ere the sun rises. Ride now, ride now, ride to Gondor. This kind of, men seem to be on the verge of failing and to be erased from Middle Earth. And there's this kind of, we go now, we ride out into that evil to do our best to stand against it. And I think, every person on that horse looking down at what it is they're about to charge into has to think, I'm not getting out of this alive. Like, there is no way we win this. Yet there still is that kind of that pull to be heroic, to have these displays of, fighting for the goodness of the world. And Tolkien acknowledges the hard fact that evil assaults not only, because a lot of the things we talked about in our last class and are going to continue is kind of that spiritual mental battle of evil, the seduction, the temptation, the greed, the hunger, all those things that kind of play in the individual's heart and soul. But he's well aware that evil has that kind of hard power, that militaristic power that needs to be confronted. And that is ultimately the great danger that faces the people of Middle Earth. Frodo kind of fights for its soul as he carries the ring, while everyone else kind of fights for the body in their defense. And perhaps because of the heroic cultures that influenced him, Tolkien repeatedly hails the valor and the virtue of soldiers, ancient and modern, who are willing to die in defense of their country and their people. When I was in Golden, that is a community where a lot of people served in the military, and I always had to go out on Memorial Day and speak, and I always spoke, and I always used the same Bible verse: there's no greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends, as a reminder that I don't see the soldiers who die as dying for a constitution or the idea of democracy or of capitalism or whatever crap we're being fed, but for their parents, for their brothers and sisters, for their children, for their neighbors, for the strangers who live within the borders of their country. This is what it is that they're actually fighting for people.
In the training process, they make a unit, and they'll find their comrades in their unit too.
Yeah.
That's very much part of the military training.
And Tolkien in his...
No one left behind.
Yeah. And Tolkien in his notes writes, let us by all means esteem the heroes of old, men caught in the chains of circumstance or their own character, torn between duties equally sacred, dying with their backs to the wall. And I think Tolkien existing in the world and in the time of World War I and World War II, men caught in the chains of circumstance. What do you think he means by that?
I don't care, someplace else I'd rather be.
Okay, there's a yeah.
Well,
I would hope so.
I mean,
when they joined, what they didn't tell them about trench warfare was we're going to the glory to beat the Kaiser, right? And then you get there, and now you're not going anywhere. You're going over, get out of that trench and run towards the machine guns. And you got to go, and they'll shoot you. It's you're trapped.
I know. I mean, I'm reading with my class, the 10th graders, and it's very hard on all five of the Western Front. It's very hard for them to understand what this young man, Paul, who's the narrator, is explaining. I mean, we really have to stop and really, really break it down because they don't understand the mental. Like he just got 14 days of leave. He goes home, but he's disconnected to anybody that's there. He really doesn't want to be there. And he keeps saying to himself, I don't understand why these books mean nothing to me. They were my whole life before I left. I'm here with my mother and my sister, but I really rather not be here. And they're like, why? He hasn't seen them in a long period of time. I said, because he's disconnected from them. And so they're having a really, really hard time understanding what the war has done to him mentally.
It's a profound attachment.
Yeah, it is, it's just, the majority of them have all watched the movie, both of them. I refuse to show it in class because to me, it's just not a movie I think you can show it in class. They wanna go watch it because it's rated R, they wanna go watch it on their own. So be it, but man, Miss Brown, they literally blew off his head. I'm like, you need to come into class and really like share that with everybody in here. But it was, the part with the arms that we talked about, he's holding up to the barbed wire. The next thing you know, he looked over there at his buddy and there's nothing but hands and an arm, the body's gone. How does he deal with that? So it's really playing on their mind. They're really, they're really having a hard time grasping.
My brother had nightmares for 30 years.
And I think, I think he does have that idea of duty and being sent out. But I also see it as this idea of men caught in the chains of circumstance. Especially like World War II, and people didn't even know what was happening. I mean, maybe they had ideas. I mean, we can't pretend that there weren't horror stories coming out of Austria and Germany and Poland about what was happening to the Jews. But this idea that you almost had to do something, or evil in some ways had its triumph. And I think that's kind of Tolkien's understanding. This is, the necessity of war isn't for expansion, isn't to find glory and honor and fame. It's when the evil and the brokenness of the world rears its ugly head, inevitably it seems like at some point some people have to stand up and engage with it in some way, shape, or form. But that also kind of leads one to that self-righteous self-justification of I am good and my enemy is evil. So what we're going to talk about in our next class as we kind of finish up this idea of war is how one should feel about it and how one should go about it. And then we're going to end our section with war and what I think is probably a person best equipped to kind of talk about these things, and that's Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the internal struggles that he had about how a Christian should engage in the conflict, full well knowing what Germany became capable of, what they were doing. And I think he and Bonhoeffer and Tolkien really, I think, share a similar worldview in their understanding of how good should stand up to evil. So we'll talk about that, and we'll finish war up in our next class. And then we'll talk about the appeal of evil to virtue. One of the things I'm excited about, I have a ton of questions for us to consider. But one of my favorite questions, why do you think we tend to assume that what is beautiful is good? And I really like that idea of how easily we are tricked by evil.
Appeals to your senses.
Yeah. If something you experience as pleasing, it becomes good. And as much as evil is depicted as being physically disturbing or offensive to the senses, evil in Middle Earth, as in our real world, can still have that deceptive quality of an alluring beauty that kind of captures us and takes us. And this is reflected in Galadriel, and when she is offered the ring. So I'm very excited for the rest of the stuff I have laid out. I have 3 questions for each one of these for us to consider after I do my little lecture. So we'll pick that up next Tuesday. All right.
Thank you.